Hi there, this is Computer Science 30S. This is the Scratch module lesson 6, and today we'll be looking at reporter blocks. And specifically, we'll be creating a new block called a max block. So we're going to make a different kind of block, a reporter block. To demonstrate this, we're going to make a block called max that takes two numbers as input and reports the bigger value or the maximum of the two. Kind of a useless thing because you can use greater than or less than, obviously, but we're going to use this as a sample. So click Make a Block and select the Operators tab. We want a reporter block. This will give the block its round shape as shown above, as well as if you make sure you click Operators, you'll get it in green. As the name implies, reporter blocks can be report, or in computer science terms, return a value. In computer science terms, these reporter blocks we would refer to as a function, and more on those in Liberty Basic later in 30S. In the image below, you can see that we use the % shortcut for making input variables. Remember, you can also use the plus sign to add variables. And you'll notice here that when I did this originally, I didn't select green, and so my max value here is there. My max is in gray. Make sure you click operator here and reporter, and you'll get a nice green one. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So in BYOB or in Scratch 2.0, we're going to go to variables, and we're going to make a block, and it's a operator and it's a reporter, and we're going to call it max value, or max if you prefer. And if you go %x and %y, you should create a block. There we go. Remember, you can also use these plus signs here to add more variables if you want. Alright, next page. This should give you a blank block editor like we've seen. Notice the words report something at the bottom of the block editor, down here. You can either type where it says something, or you can drag other blocks there. We need to figure out, first of all, what should be reported. So there's just something there now. We're going to add something in. To keep track of the variable to be reported, we're going to make another variable. We're going to use the script variables block. So if you go to the variables palette over on the left over here, and drag script variables into your block editor, make it look like this. After dragging it into the block editor, you can click on the name of the variable and change it to bigger value. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create this. So I'm going to go variables, and I'm going to find script variables, and I'm going to drag it over here, and I'm going to change A, and I'm going to call it bigger value. Okay, so now I can use the variable bigger value only inside this particular block. Okay, it has what we call a local scope. In order to complete the block, you need to do the following. Use an if-else block to set the variable bigger value to either the x or y, whichever one is bigger. You can set the value of your script variable using the set block variables palette, just like you would any other variable. Once you've dragged the set block into the block editor, you can select bigger value from the drop-down menu. You must use the drop-down menu. Dragging the variable bigger value will not work. You must select the drop-down one here. And then we're going to report the bigger value, so you drag bigger value from here down to the reporter area. That's the final step. So let me just show you how to do that. So we're going to use an if, and it's an if-else, and we're going to use a greater than in there, and then we're going to drag the x and the y. So if x is greater than y, then we're going to set. Now you'll notice that over here, if I put it here, it doesn't see bigger value. If I put it in here, bigger value is now there, because now I'm inside the block. The x, the y, and the bigger value only exist inside this block. So I'm going to set the bigger value to x, because x is the bigger one. And if that's not true, then I'm going to set the bigger value to the y. Notice that you must drag into these ones. This one here, you have to use the drop down. And I'm going to report bigger value. That's what's going to be returned as my function. It's going to return it back to my main script. All right, let's go to the next page. Now try this script out to try your max value block. So in the main area, you need to create this script. You'll notice that it asks for x. It sets number 1 to answer, it asks for y, it sets number 2 to answer, and then I say max of num1 and num2. This block here, this max of, I've created, and it's going to actually call that function, call that script, that block. It's going to do it, it's going to return the maximum value. Okay, so let's try that. So I'm going to say OK here, and I'm going to create a new script. So when that is clicked, I'm going to ask for the x value. I need some variables here. I need one called num1, and I need a variable called num2. Okay, you should not use the x and the y. The x and the y are the variables inside the block itself. So we're going to call them number1 and number2, num1 and num2 inside our regular script. So I'm going to ask, what's your x value, and wait, or first number, or whatever you want to ask for. And then I'm going to set number1 to x. Set number1 to the answer, sorry. And then I'm going to ask for the y value, and wait. And then I'm going to, variables. I'm going to set number 2 to my answer, my new answer. And then I'm going to say it. I'm going to use it. Say, where's say? I'm going to say, I'm not going to say hello, I'm going to use my operator, which I have my new block. You'll notice there's a line down here. So I'm going to say the max value of, and I'm going to use my variables here, number1 and number2. So what happens here is it asks for x, sets number1 to the answer, it asks for y, sets number2 to the answer, and then it says, it calls this script, calls this block. It says, go run max value with number1 and number2 and tell me what the answer is, and the answer is going to be whichever one is bigger, and then I'm going to say it. Let's just see if it works up here. It's asking me for the x, I'm going to put 5 in. It's asking me for the y, I'm going to put 10 in, and it tells me that the answer is 10. So it successfully has completed the script, the block. Now, what happens if the values are the same? Let's just see what happens when I run it again. What if I say 5 and 5? It says 5. Why does it say 5? Well, because I asked for, if you want to go back to your block script, you have to go down here and right-click Edit. It said that if x is bigger than y, it isn't. So that means that y must be less than or equal to, and so it sets the bigger value to y. So it's actually the second 5 that it says is bigger. So that's obviously a problem. We have to do something about it if it's going to be equal. Okay. Also note that the variables are called number1 and number2. I went over this before in the script, but x and y in the block. This means that the block can work for any two variables that you send it. They can be x and y, they can be num1 and num2, a and b, anything. It's a generic block. This means that it can be used in many other scripts. No need to change the name of the variables. This is the proper way to do it. You've written a library, you've written a small piece of code that will work for any variables that are sent to it or passed to it. So remember from last lesson how to set it up with default values. Max value is a block that should only accept numbers. It shouldn't accept words. So I'd like you to edit your block now so that it only accepts numerical values, and it has a default value of 5 and 10, just as an example. And I'd also like you to edit the block so that if the values x and y are equal, then it returns the value -1. The main script can then understand that the values are equal. Make this change using an if in the main script as well. Okay, so take a few minutes and do that. This is just a practice one. This is not a hand-in, and then I'll show you the solution. You may have created the block and forgot to select it as an operator. If it remains gray, if you did that, you're going to have to go way back and start recreate everything. Make sure it's an operator block kind of thing. When it works, then delete the main script and just save it as max value. I'm going to show you how to do that after the solution, and then you can import this project anytime you need a max value block, then you can actually use this. So go ahead, take a few minutes, try this little practice assignment here. Try to set up the default values 5 and 10. Make sure that it figures out whether they're equal or not, and then I'll show you the solution in a few minutes. Press pause now. Okay, I hope you had a chance to try that. Let's go ahead and do the default stuff first. So go to your Operators tab, right-click, go Edit. We're going to have to right-click on X now. It's still an input name. Click on this little arrow here, and we're going to make sure that it is a number, and the default value is 5. And right-click on the Y, click on the arrow, make it a number. Default value is 10. And you can pick any numbers there, really. I just picked 5 and 10 for no particular reason. Here's where you have to do some editing, though. If X is bigger than Y, then we're going to set the bigger value to X, but we're going to have to change this as well. Otherwise, we're going to have to check to see if Y is bigger than X. So we're going to need another if inside there. Like this, and put that in there, and we'll say if Y is bigger than X, then Y is the bigger value. So if X is bigger than Y, the bigger value becomes X. Y is bigger than X, then the bigger value is the Y. Otherwise, they must be equal. That's the only possibility. And so now we're going to set bigger value equal to -1. And we're just going to use that as our code for they are equal. Okay, now in here we're going to have to adjust this so that we can determine this here. So we're going to need a new variable, something called, we'll call it max. And I will set max equal to the maximum value. And then I'm going to need an if to handle the -1. And I'm going to have something like if max equals -1, then we know that they are equal. So I'm going to say that. They are equal. Otherwise, I'm going to say the max value. I'm going to say the variable max. That's what I'm going to say. Okay, let's see if that works. 5, 10. Tells me 10's the bigger one. Let's see if it works if they're equal. Let's put them the other way. Let's go 10 and 5. 10's still bigger. And now let's try them both for 5. They are equal. So there you have it. All right, this is the end of the lesson. You can move on if you like, or if you want to play around with this a little bit more, then of course you're welcome to do that.